Allahu Akbar.
On August 19, 2002, someone in Russian military logistics looked at a helicopter designed for 90 people and thought, let's put 147 people in there. What could go wrong? Spoiler alert, everything. A single $30,000 missile turned a $50 million flying giant into the deadliest helicopter disaster ever recorded. This is how institutional incompetence, enemy patience, and basic physics combined to create 127 tragic headlines in about 4 minutes. The Mi-26 Halo is what happens when helicopter designers ask themselves, what if we made everything stupidly big? This mechanical monster stretches 131 feet from nose to tail and can lift 20 tons. It could literally pick up 2 school buses simultaneously and haul them around like Amazon packages. When this thing took its first flight in 1977, it redefined what helicopters could accomplish. They're still making them today because nobody's figured out how to build anything bigger that actually works. Here's the problem with giants in warfare. They make fantastic targets. You're basically painting a bullseye on a barn and then acting shocked when someone takes a shot. By 2002, Russia had been grinding through Chechnya for 3 years. This wasn't the quick victory Putin promised. Ground convoys were getting blown up so regularly that helicopter transport became the only way to move troops without losing half your force to roadside bombs. The Mi-26 became essential because it could haul massive numbers of people and tons of equipment in a single flight. When every road has become an ambush site, you depend heavily on anything that can fly over the problems. The Mi-26's official capacity was 90 passengers, but that morning's manifest showed 147 people crammed aboard. Most were conscripts doing mandatory service who had zero say in whether their transport was loaded like a clown car. Some were heading home on leave, others deploying for their first combat experience. All trusted their leadership to make reasonable safety decisions, which was probably their first mistake. This overloading was routine. According to BBC reporting, the Mi-26 often flew to Chechnya with 100 to 110 people aboard, plus massive cargo loads. Pavel Felgenhauer documented his own experience. I once had a ride on a Mi-26 from Mozdok to Grozny, together with some 50 service personnel and journalists on top of a stockpile of crates with tons of artillery shells and other munitions. Flying around a war zone sitting on artillery shells while exceeding capacity by 60% is the kind of risk assessment that gives insurance companies nightmares. While Russians treated helicopter operations like public transit with wings, Chechen separatists were doing actual military planning. They'd formed the Chechen Air Defense Forces Group, an organized unit created in 2001 under veteran commander Shamil Basayev. These weren't amateurs. They had $1 million in funding for weapons procurement, acquired 10 portable surface-to-air missiles through Georgian connections, and allegedly received professional training at a Turkish military base. Their track record was devastating. 3 helicopters downed and over 150 soldiers killed before they even got to the Mi-26. The weapon they'd chosen was a 9K-38 Igla surface-to-air missile, a Russian-made system that cost about $30,000. Russian soldiers were about to be killed by equipment manufactured in Russia. The Chechen team positioned themselves in battle-damaged apartment buildings around Khankala base, using urban ruins as camouflage while maintaining clear sight lines to helicopter routes. They'd studied patterns, learned schedules, and positioned themselves with the patience of professional hunters. As the overloaded Mi-26 descended toward Khankala on its predictable flight path, the Chechen team fired their Igla. Heat-seeking missiles work extremely well against helicopters, because helicopters are flying heat sources with giant spinning targets painted on them. The missile tracked the engine's signature and scored a direct hit. According to Felgenhauer's reporting, the missile hit one of the engines as the Mi-26 was approaching Khankala, and the helicopter crash-landed in a minefield that made up part of the federal military headquarters' perimeter defenses. When physics meets military aviation this way, several catastrophic things happen simultaneously. Immediate engine failure, complete loss of control, fuel system rupture, an emergency crash landing wherever gravity decides to put you. Gravity chose the base's own defensive minefield because apparently the universe has a sense of irony. The crash flooded the interior with aviation fuel from ruptured tanks, creating a potential inferno with 147 people trapped inside. The main doors jammed shut from impact, leaving only a tiny crew escape hatch designed for 5 people. Not 147 soldiers in full gear. Only 34 people initially made it out. Some survivors were killed by the defensive mines while trying to escape. Others died from severe burns over the following days. Final casualty count: 127 dead. When your own defensive systems start killing your own people escaping your own burning aircraft, you've reached peak military irony. The Russian military's response revealed their priorities, and soldier welfare wasn't at the top of that list. Instead of investigation or honest communication, they launched damage control. The official story kept evolving. First, technical difficulties, then varying casualty numbers from 85 to 112 to 132 people aboard. The actual truth: 147 aboard, 127 dead missile attack. Then video evidence surfaced showing the entire attack. Chechen President Maskadov appeared on footage stating, "Here is a helicopter that is on fire and falling near Khankala. It was hit by our anti-aircraft missile." In the internet age, trying to hide disasters this big is like trying to hide elephants with post-it notes. Russian investigators tracked down the attack team led by 27-year-old Doka Tamirov. In 2004, Tamirov was sentenced to life imprisonment. At trial, he claimed he was a soldier of the state of Ichkeria, not a terrorist. The other 4 remained at large. The brutal math: Chechen investment was $30,000 for one missile. Russian losses included $50 million for the helicopter, plus millions in training costs for 127 dead soldiers. The attackers achieved over 2,000% return on investment, which beats most hedge funds without requiring explosives. Russian retaliation was predictably brutal. Unable to catch all attackers, they demolished the apartment buildings where the attack originated, leaving 100 families homeless. Major General Shabalin's justification: residents had been watching the bandits preparing terror attacks and failed to inform law enforcers. Since we couldn't protect our aircraft, we'll punish civilians for not doing our intelligence work. Khankala exposed institutional problems that persist in Russian military culture today. The intelligence breakdown was so complete, it almost seems intentional. Organized enemy units operated for months near a major base without detection, which is institutional blindness. Operational security was essentially non-existent, with flight patterns so predictable that enemies could plan elaborate ambushes with the confidence of people organizing surprise parties. The safety culture had collapsed entirely. Routine overloading with zero safety margins had become normalized. Most damaging was the accountability vacuum that followed. Instead of honest assessment and reform, leadership chose damage control and scapegoating. Lieutenant Colonel Koryakov became the designated fall guy. Colonel General Pavlov was suspended and resigned. Individual punishment replaced systemic analysis, which is like treating cancer with band-aids. These exact patterns are playing out in Ukraine today. Russian forces struggle with the same intelligence failures, unrealistic planning, and overconfident assessments. The economics have only gotten worse. Modern anti-tank weapons costing $30,000 to $175,000 destroy platforms worth millions. The institutional culture remains frozen in time. Same overconfidence followed by brutal reality. Same individual blame instead of systemic reform. Same young conscripts paying for leadership failures they didn't create. When institutional culture refuses to learn from documented failures that killed over 100 of its own people, the result is systematically destructive to its own personnel. 127 families lost everything that mattered. The bureaucratic nightmare that followed compounded their grief with institutional lies and constantly changing explanations. The 20 survivors faced trauma in a system that barely acknowledged psychological casualties existed. The disaster highlighted basic vulnerabilities that should have revolutionized helicopter doctrine. Large aircraft are sitting ducks for portable missiles, fuel systems turn crashes into infernos, and overloading eliminates safety margins. Solutions were obvious but ignored. Khankala represents institutional failure elevated to art form. 127 young men died from systemic failures in intelligence, planning, and safety culture. The cover-up guaranteed similar disasters would repeat. Those soldiers deserved competent leadership and commanders who valued lives over careers. Military disasters are products of institutional failures. The least we can do is remember these stories and learn from documented mistakes. This disaster should have changed everything, but the same patterns keep repeating. That's all for today's video. Hope you enjoyed diving into this particular military disaster and maybe learned something new. We cover all kinds of military stories around here, everything from the Cold War period up to modern-day battlefield situations. Basically, if it involves military history from these time periods, it's probably going to end up on this channel. So if that's your kind of thing, hit subscribe because there are definitely more fascinating stories coming your way. And if you could throw us a like, that'd be awesome. It genuinely helps small channels like ours actually reach people who dig this kind of content. And on the topic of the Chechen War, if you want to hear more about what that conflict was really like for the people fighting it, check out our video about Russian conscripts barely surviving in Grozny. It's not exactly widely covered stuff, and you'll probably learn some things that didn't make it into the official accounts.